Welcome to the deep dive.
Today, we're kind of embarking on an expedition, really, into the invisible architecture of memory. We're exploring Rupert Sheldrake's concept of morphic resonance, mainly drawing from his big work, The Presence of the Past. Our mission, let's say, is an intellectual journey. We're tracing these subtle, resonant fields he talks about. Fields that he argues weave together life, mind, form. It's a fundamental challenge, really, to how we normally see reality.
It really is. It's a radical concept.
Yeah.
Because Sheldrake isn't just tweaking existing scientific models. He's basically proposing we throw out the whole idea that nature is governed by these fixed, eternal, mathematical laws.
Yeah, and that's really the heart of it, isn't it? If the laws aren't eternal, then what are they? Sheldrake suggests the universe is, well, more like an organism that evolves. And its so-called laws, they're actually habits, deeply ingrained patterns set by everything that's happened before.
Exactly. We're talking about an inherent memory, an inbuilt memory, operating at every single level, from the tiniest particle right up to, the biggest ecosystems. The universe's history is actively shaping this present moment.
I think we need to pause there just on how revolutionary that is, especially when you put it against the prevailing scientific view. I mean, if you look at mainstream science today, what's the default setting for how the universe operates?
It's still largely that old mechanistic view. It dominates physics, and kind of surprisingly, it still shapes about 90% of biological thinking.
Yeah.
And it comes from these two really old philosophical streams. On one hand, you've got this belief in timeless, perfect, unchanging laws, almost mystical. And on the other, atomism, this idea of changeless, eternal bits of matter.
Okay, so you combine perfect, unchanging laws with perfect, unchanging matter. And you get a universe that's basically a giant static clockwork machine.
Precisely. It sounds elegant, but there's a massive problem. Evolution. I mean, the Big Bang, all of modern biology, confirms the universe has changed, evolved dynamically over billions of years.
Yeah.
So if the universe evolves, how can its guiding principles be non-physical, changeless, eternal? It just doesn't add up. It's a deep contradiction within science itself.
And that's exactly where morphic resonance comes in, fitting into that evolutionary picture. It suggests memory isn't just something, animals or computers have. It's woven into the fabric of the world itself, allowing forms and behaviors to be shaped by this kind of cumulative echo of similar things from the past.
That's right. And to really grasp why it might be necessary, let's jump straight into biology and look at one of the oldest questions there is, the problem of form. Morphogenesis. How does an acorn always develop into an oak tree and not, say, a mushroom or a badger?
Right. People wrestled with this for centuries, like those 17th century mechanists who proposed preformation, which was that really wild idea that a tiny, perfect miniature oak tree was already inside the acorn.
Yeah, pretty bizarre idea that collapsed as soon as microscopes got better. Today, of course, we talk about the genetic program, DNA. And DNA is crucial. It provides the components, the proteins, the building blocks. But DNA alone doesn't seem to hold the complete blueprint for the overall structure. It tells the cell what proteins to make, but not exactly where to put them to build, say, a leaf versus a root.
So DNA gives you the bricks and mortar, but the actual architectural plan for the cathedral, that unique overall form, must be somewhere else.
And that somewhere else, that invisible blueprint, is what Sheldrake calls the morphic field. These are non-material organizing patterns. They contain the inherent form, the shape, and also the behavioral habits of a system. Think of it less like a rigid mold and more like an information field that guides growth.
The hologram analogy often comes up here, which I find quite helpful. The idea that the field has this whole in every part quality.
It does, yeah. Regeneration is a great example. You cut a flatworm in half, each half grows back the missing bits, becomes a whole worm again. Or chop up a magnet. Each piece instantly becomes a smaller, complete magnet with both a north and south pole. The information for the whole seems present in every part, just like a hologram.
And crucially, these fields aren't static. They have a cumulative memory. So the morphic field for, say, your liver isn't being created fresh. It's shaped by the collective history, the success of all previous livers in your species, through this resonance across time and space.
And the resonance works based on similarity. Like patterns resonate with like patterns, like shapes attract like shapes, behaviors resonate with similar behaviors. Which means, importantly, if something is difficult the first time it's done, every time after that it becomes just a little bit easier because the habit is getting stronger in the field.
Okay, this is where we need to move from the theory, which is pretty abstract, to the actual evidence Sheldrake points to. If this is real, we should see this collective memory working outside of just genes. Let's start with the non-living world first. Crystallization.
Yes, this is one of the most, I think, compelling lines of evidence. When chemists synthesize a brand new compound, one that's never existed before, getting it to crystallize for the first time is notoriously hard. It can take months, very specific conditions.
Because there's no existing morphic field for that specific molecular arrangement yet. The compound hasn't learned that shape.
That's the idea. But here's the really interesting pattern. Once that compound has been successfully crystallized somewhere in the world, subsequent attempts to crystallize it, even in labs thousands of miles away with zero physical connection, tend to get progressively easier.
It's like the world suddenly remembers that chemical structure better. The time needed drops dramatically.
Right. The standard explanation is, well, maybe tiny invisible crystal fragments are floating around the globe, seeding new crystals. But chemists have done experiments under really strict controls, sealing off labs, filtering air, ensuring no physical fragments could possibly get in. And the acceleration effect still happens. It strongly suggests some kind of non-local influence, a pattern guiding the form that isn't just about physical bits traveling.
Okay, that's the physical world. Now let's look at learned habits in living things, because the effects seem even more striking there.
Okay.
Tell us about the rats, the ones that learned a trick and seem to pass it on.
Yeah, this goes back to maze learning experiments. Researchers would train a group of rats in one place, say Santa Barbara in California, to learn a complex maze or maybe a tricky task requiring trial and error.
And the first generation struggled, right? Took them lots of tries to get it down, establishing the habit the hard way.
Yes. But then, totally separate groups of rats, genetically similar but unrelated, were tested in labs maybe in Edinburgh or Melbourne, Australia. And the key finding was that these later generations, in completely different places, learned the exact same trick much, much faster than the original group.
Wow. So the initial learning curve was somehow flattened globally. Without any physical contact or passing genes around, the habit itself was transferred non-locally through the field. That's quite something.
It really suggests that the learning in one place set up a pattern in the species' morphic field. And later rats could just sort of tune into that established habit, making it easier for them.
And we see something like this playing out in the wild, too, which speaks to how new habits might emerge naturally. The famous blue tit story in Britain.
Right. Starting around the late 1940s, blue tits across Britain suddenly started doing this new thing, flying down to doorsteps and pecking open the foil tops on milk bottles to get at the cream underneath.
And the way this behavior spread seemed too fast and covered too much distance to be just one bird teaching another, right? Because blue tits don't usually travel very far.
Exactly. They rarely go more than a few miles from where they hatch. But this behavior seemed to pop up almost simultaneously in many distant places, and then it spread like wildfire across the whole country. The morphic resonance hypothesis is that the first few birds who figured it out established a new collective habit. Once that pattern was in the field, other blue tits, when they saw a foil-topped bottle, could more easily tune into that learned behavior.
Okay, let's shift this whole model now to, well, the most complex system we know. The human mind. If morphic fields hold the memory of forms and habits, how does that change how we think about our own memory?
It completely flips the script on the brain as computer model. Traditionally, we assume memories are physically stored in the brain's neural networks, like files on a hard drive. Sheldrake argues the brain isn't the storage device at all, it's the tuning system.
Right, the television analogy. If I smash my TV set, the picture's gone, but the broadcast signal is still out there.
Precisely. The memory itself exists in the morphic field associated with your past states. The brain tunes into that past state. If brain tissue gets damaged, you lose the ability to tune in, like breaking a specific circuit in the TV. But the memory, the information itself, still exists non-locally.
Is there any evidence from neuroscience that pushes back against memory being strictly stored in specific locations?
Well, there are the famous, or perhaps infamous, studies by Carl Lashley back in the mid-20th century. Lashley spent years removing larger and larger chunks of rats' brains, up to 90% in some experiments. He was trying to find the specific physical spot, the enneagram, where the memory of a learned maze was stored.
And the surprising result was?
He basically found that it didn't matter where he removed the tissue. The rats still retained some memory of the task. It's even the memory was distributed or non-local somehow. He famously concluded that memory just wasn't stored in any specific part of the cortex he could find. And that finding has always been a bit awkward for the standard storage model.
Okay, If we entertain this idea of non-local memory, it leads us straight into the realm of collective experience. This sounds like it could provide a kind of scientific framework for Carl Jung's idea of the collective unconscious.
It absolutely does. Morphic resonance offers a potential physical, maybe even testable mechanism for what Jung described. Those archetypes, the universal patterns of experience that seem to shape the human psyche across cultures. Jung saw this mainly as a human psychological phenomenon, but Sheldrake takes it much further.
He's saying this organizing principle, this habit-forming field, isn't just in human minds, it's everywhere, throughout the universe. That could potentially bring the idea of a collective unconscious out of the realm of just psychology or mysticism and into a broader scientific discussion.
Yes, and if our minds are constantly tuning into these collective fields, then the mind isn't just locked inside the skull. It's extended in space and time.
Which brings us to that really interesting everyday experience, the sense of being looked at. You mentioned this is a practical test.
Yeah, simple experiments have actually shown statistically significant results. People often can tell when someone is staring at the back of their head, even under controlled conditions, even sometimes when viewed remotely on CCTV. It suggests maybe an influence, or a field, extends outwards from our attention, from our minds, connecting the observer and the observed. The mind creating a perceptual field that includes both.
Let's scale up again, from the individual mind now to society itself. If morphic fields organize individual organisms, what about superorganisms, things like ant colonies, beehives, maybe even human cities?
He suggests these larger systems are also organized by their own social morphic fields. Think about a school of fish or a flock of birds making one of those sudden, perfectly coordinated turns, all at once. Studies show the reaction times are often incredibly fast, sometimes under 20 milliseconds. That's likely too fast for signals to just pass sequentially from one individual to the next through normal senses.
So it's not thousands of individual decisions cascading, it's more like the field itself coordinating the whole group simultaneously.
The field provides the underlying template for that organized movement, yes. And in a similar, though maybe more complex way, human societies and cultures are also shaped by these invisible organizing patterns, coordinating customs, behaviors, social structures, often beyond conscious individual intention.
And this loops us right back to culture and tradition. If nature has habits, societies definitely have rituals. You look at cultural, religious, spiritual practices, reciting mantras, celebrating Passover, the patterns of Christmas, they're incredibly conserved, the words, the actions.
And Sheldrake sees these rituals not just as symbolic acts. He thinks they're powerful tuning mechanisms.
So when people participate in a long-established ritual, they're not just, going through motions learned from parents. They're actually resonating with the accumulated memory, maybe even the spirit of everyone who performed that ritual before them, strengthening that cultural field.
They're actively tuning into that history, that established habit in the field. The power of chanting a mantra, for instance, might lie less in its literal meaning today and more in the specific resonant frequency it creates. A frequency that tunes the individual into the collective energy and experience built up over maybe thousands of years of transmission. It connects you to that history and reinforces group coherence.
What really strikes me here is the sheer scope of this idea. Sheldrake is asking us to see life, memory, culture, not as outputs of fixed mechanical laws, but as dynamic, evolving, interconnected systems, constantly shaped by these fields of memory. If that's true, it implies that when someone learns something difficult today, it actually makes it intrinsically a tiny bit easier for everyone else tomorrow.
Exactly. Or when a new creative style emerges, like, say, the Venetian school of painting, it doesn't just influence other painters who see the work. It potentially changes the field of painting itself, making it easier for subsequent artists to tune into that style, that way of seeing. It reframes how we think about progress and creativity.
Which leads us perfectly into a final thought to chew on. Thomas Kuhn, the philosopher of science, talked about scientific paradigms, the shared reality a scientific community agrees on, and how these paradigms are really powerful and resist change. They often need a revolution to shift.
Well, if you apply Sheldrake's lens here, you could argue that scientific paradigms are themselves incredibly strong group morphic fields. They resist change not just because of intellectual reasons or data, but because they represent the deepest, most ingrained mental habit of that scientific community, maybe even of our time. It's genuinely hard to break the resonance of what everyone knows is true.
So maybe a question for you, the listener, to reflect on. What current scientific belief or even cultural assumption are we collectively holding on to? Simply because it's the established habit, the dominant resonance of our era? Maybe look for those little patterns, synchronicities, moments of intuition in your own life. Could they be hints of this deeper morphic field pulsing beneath the surface?
It's really an invitation to try and sense that web of resonance for yourself in your everyday experience.